This is Border Television. Now, taking us up to the Border News Summary, which will be at 10 to 12, we have the final programme in the series, Me and My Camera.
Hello.
Hello. Over the last 9 weeks, we've tried to show you how to understand your camera better and hopefully how to take lots of much better photographs. And by now, you should be getting quite a collection ready to do something with. Well, in this program, we're going to try to show you what to do with the pictures, how to look after the negatives, and a little bit later, we'll be showing you some of the magic of actually developing and printing your own films.
But since we've gone for simplicity so often throughout these series of programmes, we'd like to leave you with this thought before we go on to the more complex business of printing. Just because you end up with end prints like this does not necessarily mean that's the end of the road. It's always entirely possible to get copies made of your end prints, or indeed to go one better and have selective enlargements made. All you need to do is decide which portion of your picture you'd like to blow up. Let's say we're going to knock out that piece, and actually mark on your picture with a chinograph, wax pencil. Scrub out the bit you don't want to see. With your picture marked up rather more carefully than I've done it, take that with your negative to your laboratory or to your local dealer and say, give me a hand-printed enlargement, please. You'll get some very fine quality back.
Now, once you've got these pictures back, do something with them. And I would suggest that what you think about doing is actually putting them on the wall, as I do with mine. Now, here we've got some enlargements from various pictures I've taken. And even with your end prints, you can get little frames for those, and even, in fact, frames for your Polaroid pictures to put them on the sideboard.
Mind you, you may not want to cover the entire wall of your house with photographs, so can we also suggest that you think about the photograph album? I'm sure you'll recall the delight with which you look at great-grandmama in her crinoline dress and grandfather in his old striped suit and so on. Well, the modern family album can be that also. It can be a great delight for your own children, your grandchildren in 50 years or so's time. All you have to do is choose a little carefully the pictures you're going to put in. For example, 2 here. The young lad in this one has his eyes just closed. So choose another shot that is a little better. There's one with his eyes nice and bright and wide open. So choose your pictures rather carefully, edit them, arrange them in your album, put captions on, as we haven't yet had time to do here, and there you are, a wonderful piece of history for the future.
Now, you may be saying, oh, yes, it's all right for them, but what was that they were saying in Programme 3 or Programme 4? So what we'd like to do now is just a little resume of some of the crucial points about getting good pictures. And one of the first things we mentioned was film speed. Now, if you remember in the film when George went to church to do some pictures, he, because of the dimness inside the church and the problems of using flash in there, used a fast film. And here's the result of it. Now, a fast film is one with a high ASA number, in this case 400 ASA. It enables you to work in dim conditions, but there is a slight risk that you'll get grain. Now, when we saw Derry Brabs taking pictures, he was using speed with a very low ASA number, in this case 25 ASA. Now, this gave him a very fine-grained picture, but because of the slowness of the film, he had to use a tripod because it gave him a very slow shutter speed. Or alternatively, it would have to be a very, very bright day. So that's fast film and slow film.
And one of the important things about pictures like Derry's, and indeed the shot of that in the church, is that the framing is greatly important. It certainly is important in Derry's shot there of that rather beautiful landscape. When framing, there's one thing that you absolutely must do, and that is peer into every corner of that viewfinder. Every single corner. Be distracted by nothing. Take a look at Joe here. You can see that his sort of wobbling about on the screen while I'm just moving around, trying to get them framed absolutely right. Oh, I must move over a little bit there. Now I've gone too low. I must move up higher. That's better. That's much better. That's it. That's when we'll take the photograph. Also in the viewfinder, you'll find a lot of information. You'll find flashing lights and lens apertures and perhaps the shutter speed in use. Do try to ignore those. Take care to watch, first of all, and see what you're doing. Watch the numbers, but then concentrate on every corner of that viewfinder. That really does matter. That's what it's all about.
But don't always ignore the flashing lights, as George said, because that's the information that's going to enable you to make a correct exposure. Now, the exposure is the mixture of the aperture and the speed. And this can work two ways. When we were looking at Derry Brabs, what he was trying to do was to get lots of depth of field. Now, if you remember, depth of field is the amount of the picture that is going to be in focus, and the smaller the aperture you use, the more is actually going to be in focus. Now, in the case of Derry's picture here, he used f/22, so that everything between the reeds here in the foreground, right the way back to the top of those hills, was in focus. Now, to get f/22, Derry had to use a slow shutter speed. Now, at the other end of the scale, we had Chris Smith. Now, Chris, as a sports photographer, is trying to freeze the action. He's going for a very fast shutter speed, in this case, 1,000th of a second, and because of that, to let the right amount of light into the lens, Chris had to use a very large aperture, in this case, f2. And he would have to be very careful with his focusing on this. Now, I think I can explain this better if I show you a handheld meter. It's a very useful accessory. If you've got a camera that hasn't got a built-in meter, you can buy one of these accessory light meters to do the same job. Now, with this one here, on the white numbers, we have the apertures, and the black numbers, we have the shutter speeds. Now, in the case of Derry, he would be looking for his depth of field, which is the f/22. Opposite it is the speed, 1/8 of a second. Now, if we come to the other end, to Chris, he's looking for the fast speed, 1,000th of a second, and in his case, he's then stuck with f2 as an aperture. But in fact, you could set it anywhere between those and get the same exposure, but looking for either depth of field or fast speed, depending on the type of picture you were trying to take.
So don't forget those very important elements, but equally think very carefully about focusing, crispness of the image, sharpness. And in the case of Heather Angel, she would be photographing some rather close-up objects. Suppose I wanted to take a picture of, let's say, these flowers. Using even a fairly sophisticated single-lens reflex with a standard lens, I still can't focus closer than, that's about it. I've got about 8 or so blooms on the screen. If, however, I take that lens off and put on what we call a macro lens, it allows me to focus rather closer. In fact, I can go right into about a couple of inches, and there I end up with 1 bloom on the screen. You can see that it would be very easy indeed to show a bee's knees on a picture like that. But let's show you in actual practice how that works. Here's a shot which Heather Angel took from, I think, about 6 inches using a macro lens. And you'll see that she has concentrated greatly on the ivy leaves there. Now, rather sadly, the little 110 cameras, about which we've said so much in the series of programs, do have some limitations. And here's a distinct example of that. Joe took a 110, pushed it to its utmost, absolutely to its ultimate, and moved in as close as he could, which I think was, what, 3-4 feet thereabouts. And you can see he's got many, many more pieces of ivy there than Heather had.
Another limitation that you might find with the smaller cameras is in things like action photography. Now, Chris Smith uses a whole range of long lenses so that he can bring the action closer to him. Now, the sort of lens that Chris might have taken this picture of the start of an athletics race is a lens like this, which is a 500mm telephoto lens. It's also the sort of lens that if someone was photographing a cricket match, they would have to use. It really is a bit of a monster. Very expensive, but if your dedication is to sports photography, a lens like this might be a useful thing. A better idea, I think, though, is to probably use a zoom lens of the type that Chris showed us when he was doing the canoeing. Now, a zoom lens is one with a variable focal length, in this case between 80 and 200. And you can set it anywhere between those two settings. Now, the sort of effect you will get is normal to telly, normal to telly, normal. But don't forget as well, as Chris did, that you can use this as a creative tool by using a slow shutter speed and actually zooming the lens, as this example here, while the shutter is actually open. Now, I think Chris used about a 15th of a second here and very quickly zoomed the lens as he took the picture to give that sort of exploding action effect that he's got there.
And so there's Joe talking about those techniques again, which really are very, very important. The technicals are primarily important. But there are other things that are very, very important too, and certainly what Joe was talking about there with that zoom lens picture was framing, the actual content of the picture. Now, where Derry was concerned, humping himself over the Yorkshire moors, and Heather Angel going out to take very small pieces of landscape and little creatures, they would both need to frame their picture absolutely precisely. And they would both use, consequently, a tripod, good sturdy tripod. They would be able to arrange the picture, maneuver it, manipulate it until they got the framing absolutely right. Then they would lock the tripod rigidly, lock the picture, stand away so that they didn't shake the tripod, and fire the thing by means of a cable release. Easy.
Now, just now I was showing you some monster telephoto lenses, but if you remember the programme with Patrick Litchfield, when he was photographing the children, he was using a medium telephoto lens of either 100 millimetres, 135 millimetres. And as we said, it's a very reasonably priced lens and a very good one when you're actually photographing people. Now, the advantage is when you are photographing people with a lens like this, in the case of Patrick Litchfield, it was the children, is that the depth of field is very shallow with this lens, so you get a blurred background. You also get, because you're slightly away from the children, a very nice proportion with the children. But with that blurred background, remember there is a problem, and that is the depth of field is a forward thing as well. And in this case, where Corinne actually leant too far forward when she was laughing so much at the book she was being read, she moved herself out of the picture, or out of the focus of the picture. Now, when you are photographing people, there is one word of warning about lenses, and that is the wide-angle lens. It's a lens that, if you start getting close to someone, will actually distort them. And as this camera moves in on me now, you will see how my face is becoming distorted. And this is the effect you will get if you start using a wide-angle lens very close with people.
But I'd hate, Joe, to leave you with the idea that the wide-angle lens is altogether negative. It does have many, many very positive advantages. Now, let me show you with the photograph here that Homer Sykes produced for us out at Saltaire, one of the superb examples of crispness from the far, far background to the immediate foreground here. This really does, I think, sum up the positive advantages of the wide-angle lens. But also, there is the important fact that the figure in the center is shown in his surroundings. Homer was able to show us the atmosphere, relate to us where the man was, show us a great many advantages. If he had used a 100mm lens and gone in very, very close, this is what we would have ended up with, just a portrait of a man bending down in the middle of the road, whereas that does have a great deal more atmosphere. So the wide-angle lens is not to be considered a negative instrument. It does have its positive attributes too. And it's a very, very simple piece of machinery to use, and it's also as inexpensive as any of the others. Just bear in mind, wide angle, perfectly simple. Instead of a narrow angle of view, it's a wide angle of view.
Now that's a resume on the taking of pictures, and hopefully at the end of it you're left with a very satisfactory film. George and I would now like to actually show you just how easy it actually is to process your own film and to make prints from it. So, should we go to the darkroom, George? Yes. A place like this attic is perfect for a darkroom. Now, developing and printing a film is a little more complicated than putting your washing in a washing machine and doing it. Everything I need to develop and print the film is in this box here, the lot. Now, the word darkroom is slightly misleading as well, because it doesn't have to be a dark room, it just has to be a light, tight room. And before we start, I'll just finish blacking out here. So we're now totally light, tight. Developing the film is the first step. 2 simple chemicals and a developing tank such as this one here. Now, the process, in fact, takes about 10 minutes, so I'll purely show you what's involved. And this first step would be done in total darkness, so you will see me do it, but you would normally be in total darkness. The developing tank has inside it a spiral like this to take the film. And I would simply open my tub of film, take out the film, load it onto the spiral, put it into the tank, do the lid up, and now I can, in fact, switch my lights on. Because the tank is light tight, the film is safe. The 2 chemicals I need are the developer to bring up the image and the fixer to fix it, with a simple water bath between the 2. So I would pour my developer into the tank, put the lid on, give it a couple of bangs just to dislodge any air bubbles that might be in there, and then I would agitate it. And to agitate it, I'd do this a couple of times, and I would continue doing this about every half minute through the development. This makes sure that fresh chemicals keep in contact with the film. When the development time is finished, and you've got to look at the manufacturer's instructions for that, put away the developer, pour in the water to give it a wash, agitate a few times, get rid of the water and put in the fixer. Agitate that again, and then my film is developed. As I say, about 10 minutes on average, a quarter of an hour with some different products. I'd then take it down to the bathroom, give it a good wash, probably for half an hour or so, and hang it up in a dust-free place to dry. And that is all that's involved in developing the film. Now, to get the print, I need an enlarger, which is a little bit like a camera in reverse, and my negatives and some paper. Now, the negatives, when they're well dried, I've cut up into convenient lengths, and I've stored for safety in a wallet such as this. Although the negative I'm going to print now, I've in fact already set up in my enlarger and worked out the exposure. Now, the advantage of doing the print is that the paper isn't sensitive to a special sort of red light, which also comes in the kit. So firstly, I'm going to put on my safe light, as it's called, and now switch off the room lights, and I can now work in this. Now, please don't adjust your set at the moment. It's gone very red, but that's the light for me to work with on my print. Now, the first thing I would do is put on my enlarger, frame up my picture, and focus it. Now, I've already worked out a 5-second exposure for doing this particular print. So I get out my sheet of paper, make sure I've shut the packet again, put it into the enlarger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, off. I now go across to my 3 trays. The developer is the same as the one used for the film, and the fixer is the same one I used for the film. And I put it in to my chemicals, and this, if you look now, is one of the magic moments of photography. As your print starts coming up in the developer. Now, I'm wearing gloves for 2 reasons. It's never a good idea to happily handle chemicals with your bare hands, and also the way I use them stops me contaminating my chemicals with each other. So I'll change that glove. But on this one, from the wash into my fix, again, I've condensed these times very much. After it's been in the fix for about 5 minutes, I would give it the same sort of wash, and the advantage with modern photographic papers is then I'd be able to just hang it on the line to dry. And let me show you a print that I did a little bit earlier. Back to being a positive again. And that is how easy it is to develop and print a film, black and white. Let's see how George is getting on with making a colour print from a transparency.
Well, that really does have to be one of the most magical moments in the whole of photography, doesn't it? Absolutely super seeing that print come up in the developer. Let's see the process now in colour. There are one or two differences we should point out. First of all, we're going to work with transparency, making a colour print from a transparency. There's a number of systems for doing this, but the one we'll work with is basically very simple. Now, the differences are that in the early parts of this process, you have to work in complete darkness. Colour paper is not at all kindly towards light, as Joe's black and white paper was there. He was able to use a red safe light. I can't do this for the early stages. Now, the second major difference is that when printing in colour, you will have to dial in some filtration on your enlarger. Again, there's a number of ways of doing this. The essential point is that it will alter the colour balance of the light coming down through the lens, coming from the lamp house, down through the lens, down onto your baseboard where the paper is. Now, it may look and sound a bit complicated, but don't worry about it, because the manufacturers of the paper make it also very, very easy for you, and they provide a little table which has got the basic outlines. As you progress and become more confident, you'll find yourself slightly changing those times to suit different colour balances. Okay, so let's have a go at doing this then. We pick up our transparency, having selected one that looks just about right, place it into the enlarging negative carrier. Again, exactly the same as Joe was doing over there. Up we go and put that into the enlarger. Into the enlarger, like that. It didn't want to go then, did it? All right, now having done that, the next stage is to switch on the enlarger and frame up my picture. Let's suppose this is my picture. I just put my paper on there, juggle it around, move it around, again exactly as Joe was doing. What I'm trying to do here is just make myself the most attractive picture I can find. Right, having done that, now comes the darkness piece. I would take out my paper, put it into the enlarging easel, total darkness remember, switch on the enlarger for the appropriate time, whatever it is, 4, 5 seconds or so. In fact, really, this is going to take a bit longer. It's about 30 seconds, up to 30 seconds. Now, having done that, I then switch off the enlarger, take my piece of paper from here, now starts the developing process. Now, we take a drum, take the lid off the drum, and slide the paper into here. Now, let's see. I'll use a bit of scrap of paper here to show you what I mean. The paper really does go in there very, very easily. Lies flatly around the drum, but we're not going to develop a piece of paper. You must imagine that's photographic paper. Then I'd put the drum back on its cradle again, where, incidentally, I have mixed up in advance some chemicals. There are only 3 chemicals here, and you can see I've got them floating in a jacket of water. That is to keep the temperature up. Temperature's a little bit critical for this process, so I did all this in advance. Right, ready to process now, we would take our developer, transfer the appropriate measure into the red jug, or this jug here, for those of you in black and white, pour it into the drum. This is the bit that I love. Switch on, and away it goes. Now, in fact, that's obviously a mechanical version, but it's entirely possible to get hold of relatively less expensive ones with a little handle which really does the same sort of thing. That would develop for, in this case, 2 minutes. I then take my drum out, pour away that chemical, and put in another, the second one, doing the same business, and the same again for the third one. Now, the times of processing there are 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, which is what, 9 minutes. Now, my next process is 3 minutes, and that is just a question of washing the print. So let's go over to the sink and we'll do this. I'd whip out my print, bung it into the sink there, and splash merrily around, or better still, I'd use running water. I'd have to use several changes of water if it was not a running water setup. Now, when this is washed for 3 minutes, 3 minutes is a short time, you might think, but that's because it's a plasticized base and it doesn't sort of soak up paper in the same way that fiber-based paper does. But when the print comes out of the paper, you'll notice a little red cast. Nothing to worry about. That really will clear very, very quickly. And at a short space of time, the print will dry and ripen, and there we are. We'll wind up with a gorgeous little colour print. It really is as simple as that. Now, let me just wipe my hands, and I'll go over and join Joe. Now, that wasn't so much more complicated than the one you did, Joe, was it?
No, it just takes a little bit of time to get used to working in the darkness, but once it goes in the drum and you put the room lights back on again, you're laughing. Well, there it is. I hope that over the last 10 weeks we've explained how your cameras work, how you can get more out of them, and some very simple techniques to improve your photography, well, we hope 100-fold.
Well, for my part, I hope what we've done is take away some of that mysticism. It always amuses me how people believe that it's a black magic art. Forget it. It's a very simple business, really, and I hope that we've helped you see that point of view. And certainly it's been a lot of fun trying to explain it to you. But it's you, actually, that is behind the camera, and it's you that takes the pictures. It's not all that equipment.
Yeah.
Goodbye now.
Goodbye.
The Me and My Camera book can be obtained from newsagents and bookshops or by sending a cheque or postal order for £4.95, made payable to Yorkshire Television, to this address. Me and My Camera, Yorkshire Television, P.O. Box 900, Leeds LS1 1TP. That's Me and My Camera, Yorkshire Television, P.O. Box 900, Leeds LS1 1TP.
Now here's the Border Television news summary. It's been revealed tonight that part of the Windscale